Shri Gurubhyo Namaha Harihi Om Gajananam Bhudakanadi Sevidam Kavitta Jambho Balasara Vakshidham Umasudam Sogha Vinashakaranam Namami Vickneswara Pada Pankajam Gajananam Mahakayam Vignarajam Vinayakam Vishvesham Vishvashaksham Ganeshayam Namo Namaha. Om Jnananandamayam Devam Nirmalar Spatikhatrudhim Adharam Sarva Vidyanam Ayagrivam Upasmahe Yasyad Varada Vakradhyaya Parishadya Parashatham Vignam Nignam Tisatatam Vishwashremam Tamashraye Gurur Brahma Gurur Vishnu Gurur Devo Maheshwaraha Gurur Sakshat Parabrahma Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Gurave Sarvalokanam Bisaje Bhavaroginaha Nidaye Sarva Vidyanam Sri Dakshinamurthaye Namaha Hari Om Tat Sat Sri Saishwararpanamastu. Om Ramanujadaya Patram Jnana Vairagya Bhushanam Srimad Venkaranathaya Bandha Vedanta Deshikam Lakshmi Nada Samaramba Nada Yamuna Madhyamam Asmadacharya Vargyantam Vandhe Guru Parampara. Om Apadamapahartharam Dhatharam Sarvasampadham Lokabhiramam Shriramam Bhuyo Bhuyo Namamyaham Ramaya Ramabhadraya Ramachandraya Vedase Raghunathaya Nathaya Sithayam Pataye Namaha. Om Shri Rama Rama Rame Rame Tirame Rame Manorame Sahasranama Tattulyam Rama Nama Varanane Rama Nama Varanane Nama Iti. Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Ramarthanamastu. Astika. Namo Namaha. Suswagatam. Welcome to week 7, where we are looking at the 6th canto or the 6th kanda, which is the Yuddha Kanda. And last week, I spoke to you about Sundara Kanda, the book of beauty, which at the end, I finished by saying, Hanuman finished his task victoriously and returned back to report to his king Sugriva and obviously his new master Rama. Now, the Yuddha Kanda, as the book of war, has got 128 chapters, right? And in some later writings, it is also referred to as Lanka Kanda, right? So don't get confused if you are browsing the net and you come across this Lanka Kanda. It actually refers to the Yuddha Kanda in no uncertain words. Right, so after Hanuman comes back, returns to Lord Rama's camp, he completed his mission successfully, finding out whereabouts of Sita, conversing with her, doing some damage to Ravana's island of Lanka. And of course, once all this information was conveyed to Rama and Sugriva then says, all right, let us go and start our journey towards this island, all march towards the southern seas. Now, when the Vanara army reached the Mahendra Mountains. Remember, the Mahendra Mountain is where Hanuman leaped from in order to catapult his journey or his flight to the island or the beautiful island of Lanka. And I also explained to you last week why it's called Sri Lanka, the only country in the world that has that phrase, Sri, right? Because of beauty. And Valmiki describes what Hanuman saw and what beauty he appreciated that lay before him. Hence, Kimtaha itihi Sri Lankaha. That's what I said to you last week. So he's saying what grand beauty is there before me, So all the monkeys, right? The entire monkey army marched forward, and it looked like the entire earth where they were. Right? The entire earth were covered with monkeys and monkeys and monkeys and more monkeys, right? So Rama comes and he prays to Samudra Raja. Samudra Raja is the king of the ocean, right? King of the ocean. Quite interestingly, when the Hollywood movie Aquaman was released, right, I was having a conversation with some of my friends in the university, right, a professor of astrophysics and that sort of caliber, and we were talking about this movie. I said it's no surprise to us. I mean, I say us, I mean Hindus, that there is the king of the ocean in that movie called Aquaman, right? The story goes about the king of the ocean and so on and so forth. So I said, yeah, we call him Samudra Raja. Samudra means ocean, Raja means king. And there was a professor there who also knew Sanskrit. He said, yes, I've read about it. It's Ramayana, isn't it? I said, yes, indeed. And there we are. So whatever we see today may not be a modern creation, right? The concept may be communicated in different ways to us, but if you research it, it definitely has some science going back to one of the Ithihasas or the Vedas or the Upanishads or some Smriti, right? That is actually my findings from my research and doing all this, right? So Rama prays to Samudra Raja and he appears. Rama says, can we have your permission? You see, those days, before they did anything, they always sought the permission of the keeper of that. So, all the Panchabhutas, the Ashtatik Balakas, the Tik Balakas, everybody had a role to play, and they were always sought, and permission was asked before, doing anything. But these days, we don't do that. So, there are repercussions. Anyway, Rama prays to Samudra Raja. He comes, he appears, he says, right, build a bridge across, use the sand from here, use the stone from here, right? And he goes off. So Rama then calls Nala. Nala and Nila. I explained to you in the first week in the introduction who they really are. Nala is Vishwakarma, the celestial architect, and Nila is Agni. So Nala and Nila were put in charge of the project. So the fact that it was the ocean, right? Only stones and boulders from specific mountains and sand from certain parts of the beach could be used. And this is what Samudra Raja directed Rama and said, this is what you need to do. So Rama then told Sugriva then told, the monkeys what to do. So as the monkeys, put the sand and tried to put the stone on it, the stones kept sinking and they didn't know what to do. And at that time, Agastya Muni had come, right, to visit Rama and all that. Remember, I said to you, these rishis and saints and sages of yore will come to you at the right point in time to give you that little bit of help just to push you forward a little bit, right? All you need to do is just think the help will come at the right time. But you need to do what you have to do. You can't say help will come and not do anything, right? So I always tell my students this. I say, just because you are praying to God to help you through the exams doesn't mean you cannot do what you must do to the best of your ability. And that's why the saying is there, isn't it? Do your best and God will do the rest, right? So anyway, so Agastya said to Nala and Nila, because they saw him and they said, Maharishi, we don't know what to do. And he says, who are you building this bridge for? And Nala and Nila said, Rama. Write his name on the stone and then put it on there. So they began to inscribe Ram, Ram on each stone. And lo and behold, it did not sink. It began to float, right? And of course, as they put the sand, because the stones were floating, the sand kept, slipping in between, the stones. And it was a really difficult thing. So and Swami talks about this. He talks about the role of the squirrels, right? So Nala and Nila summoned the squirrels and said to them, go into the water, dip your fur, make it wet, then come and roll yourself on the sand on the beach, and then come and wriggle off the sand so that it, plugs the gap between the stones. Every little helps. So the squirrels went and did, hundreds and hundreds of squirrels went, dipped themselves, went and rolled on the sand, came back. So in modern building day, right, in a modern building sense, it's called cement, isn't it? You cement it to hold it in place and to give it that body of steadiness, right? This is what they did those days, right? Those days itself, they've done that. Different type of cement. The sand, the rocks, everything was different, right? Now, I must tell you something that NASA discovered, right? NASA, recently, maybe 2-3 years ago or something, right? But that video is still floating around in WhatsApp. They went and actually did a research on this. Now, the bridge actually was built in 5 days by the Vanara army. 5 days it took them to build the bridge, and they call it the Rama Setu Bridge, right? Rama Setu Bridge. Of course, when the British went there, they call it the Adams Bridge because, of course, when they went there, what remained was the residue of what was once a bridge, a fully, visual bridge. Now, they could see remnants of what was, and they said, this must have been here since time immemorial, and therefore they called it Adams Bridge. But I'm talking about the specific scientists from NASA who've done this research, right? They found that the quality of the stone, right, goes back about 7,000, 7,500 years. And they also found that the sand used was much more earlier than the rocks or the stones. And they said this cannot have been built by, modern technology. It is a man-made bridge, right? Actually, it is a man-made bridge. No, it was made by monkeys, right? The Vanaras built it. So it's fantastic to know, and I'll tell you later when Valmiki calculated the war, actually the occurrence of the war, and you will see how scientifically accurate Valmiki's calculation is to the modern day NASA calculation of the date or the assumed date of the bridge. I mean, it's fantastic science, right? So Rama, when the bridge was completed in 5 days, again they prayed to all the guardians, the Panchabhutas, to help them, because not only they're crossing the water, there's the sand is there, the wind is there, space is there. So they prayed to all the Panchabhutas. Of course, with Hanuman there, they don't have to do anything, right? So the entire army with Rama and Lakshmana crossed over. And of course, when they reached Lanka a few days later, they climbed up Mount Sunesu and made camp. And Rama says, I think it is only proper that we warn Ravana that we are already here. And if he wants to give up, so, he can still do that. We can avoid the war. So Rama sends Angada, who's Angada, right? Son of Vali, the crown prince, the Yuvaraja for the Vanara army. He sends Angada over. And Angada, the moment he went into the palace walls of Ravana, he was trying to, be caught. He was trying, the Ravana's people were trying to catch him. But Angada puts his foot down and he says, if any one of you can remove my foot, can lift it, then, Rama will accept defeat and we will leave, right? Because Angada had a vow that, if he puts his foot down and he says no one can lift his feet, no one can. Of course, if Ravana had come, we don't know, that's a question mark, right? Because Ravana had the boon of being invincible, but at the same time, he also left out monkeys and man, which is why this is a combination of monkeys and man coming to fight Ravana, right? So you hit someone with their um, the weakest tool, or your strongest tool, which is their weakest tool, rather. Right? Okay, so Ravana was told, look, Angada is there, right? He's saying, still not too late for you to give up. And Ravana says, what are you all doing wasting time? Kill that monkey, kill that monkey. What are you doing? And again, Vibhishana comes. Remember last week I spoke about Vibhishana Dharma, Dharma Vakya. So Vibhishana says, no, Angada is a messenger. You cannot kill the messenger, right? Let him go. So Ravana sends message, says, don't kill the fellow, right? Send him back saying, we are ready anytime. They can come. So what's the lesson for you and me here, right? The lesson for you and me here is when ego and arrogance takes over, all sense of discrimination, right? All sense of right conduct, all sense of dharma is lost. And dharma, remember I spoke to you, is one of the 3 sessions I did leading up to the Ramayana. So I did duty and devotion, I did dharma, and I did surrender here. So go back to that. Those videos are still on YouTube, so you can have a look at it, right? So Ravana was told, okay, the Vanara army is camping, and he was slightly worried. So he summoned his ministers for advice. And his ministers, of course, if you what Swami always says and what Shankara said, show me your friends and I will tell you your character, right? So of course, all of them ringing the bell for Ravana. So of course they will say, come on, Ravana, why are you scared? It's just monkeys on the other side, right? No, you are unconquerable, you are invincible, you're this, you're that, the massaging his ego and pride, right? Ravana also consulted his brother Vibhishana at this point, and then he consults Kumbhakarna during the war at some point. But I'm going to say to you what Vibhishana told him. Vibhishana said, look, the right thing to do is to return Sita, who is Rama's wife, right? You can't blame the man for coming so far to claim his wife back from you. You did the wrong thing. You did another big thing. So Ravana, as my brother, I'm telling you, just return the wife back, seek forgiveness, and all will be well. You got your kingdom to rule, Ravana was enraged by what Vibhishana was suggesting, and he said, you get out of my court. I don't want to see you here, right? Remember, I told you in the first week, in the introductory session, about who these 3 brothers are. Ravana was Rajasic, Vibhishana was Sattvic, and of course his other brother Kumbhakarna was Tamasic, right? So they represent those qualities. And so naturally, right, Sattvic is always balanced, Rajasic is always enraged, and Tamasic is always in a state of inaction. So Vibhishana then decides to leave. He says, there's no point me here. If you're not going to listen to good advice, what's the point? And I'm not going to go to war because I know that is adharmic, right? So Vibhishana says, I'm going, right? I'm going. I can't stay here anymore, right? So he goes to Rama's camp. He actually goes to Mount Nesu and he says to Rama, I am Vibhishana, Ravana's brother. I want to be on the side of dharma and not on the side of adharma. So everybody was doubtful, right? All the monkeys, Sugriva, Angada, everybody was thinking, hey, this is Ravana's brother, something fishy happening here, right? Rama, don't, Rama, don't, Rama, don't. Hanuman was, of course, silent because when Rama is there, who is he to form an opinion? Who is Hanuman to form an opinion? Can you imagine if he has such a level of bhakti that he doesn't even want to form an opinion because Rama is there and he's the one who should decide? I mean, just look at the depth of bhakti there. Whereas in today's world, it doesn't take anything for people to be judgmental and to give their opinion and to decide and to take lesson from Hanuman. When someone who is endowed with the right to make a decision, leave it to them. And unless they ask you for your opinion, don't give. Hanuman just kept quiet. Even everybody's asking, Hanuman, what do you think? Just kept quiet. He's looking at Rama like this, Rama Bhakta Anjaneya, always looking at Rama bowed in extreme bhakti. Pure bhakti. So Rama says, and look at Rama's quality here, right? Everybody was doubting. Hanuman was silent. Lakshmana, of course, he never says anything because Rama is there, unless Rama asks him, right? And he knows Rama never makes a wrong decision. He knows, as a matter of fact. And Rama says, if he has come here, right, forsaking everything that meant something to him all this time, do you all not think that we should give him a chance? We should give him an opportunity. And Rama opened his arms and said, come, Vibhishana, you are most welcome to stay with us. We're not compelling you to fight, take arms against your brother. But if you think you want to do that, that is entirely up to you. Duty and devotion. Remember, I did this as the first precursor to Ramayana. Duty and devotion, two different things. Anyway, so Rama accepts him with open arms. Now, my question to all of us is, at this point, how many of us actually give other people an opportunity when they have come, forsaking everything that meant something to them? Do we put aside all sense of discrimination, all sense of judgment, and give them an opportunity because that's the right thing to do? Or do we think, you are the fellow who said this, you are the fellow who did this, your brother is so-and-so, you are married to so-and-so, all of this. So reflect and act accordingly. So Ravana always trying to do something, the other way. That means not the right way. In another makes sense, if you like. So he calls the magician, Vidyut, come here. He comes before Ravana. He says, what can I do for you, master? And Ravana says, I want you to conjure the head of Rama so I can just take the head of Rama and show it to Sita, right? If she loves him to an extent, she might die of shock. And if she dies of shock, Rama will leave. He will not fight because there's nothing to fight for. Look at how Ravana is thinking, right? That is why I'm saying, when desire and ego and arrogance clouds your mind, no matter how learned you are, you will go into the wrong path. 100%. And Ravana is prime proof of that. So Vidyut, of course, he has no choice because it's the great grand Ravana who's asking him to do it. So he, through his magic, he makes a head of Rama. And of course, Ravana holds that head, takes it to Sita. And of course, Sita, the moment she sees, she faints, right? And before Ravana could give further instructions to Trijata, the Asura that was looking after Sita, he was summoned back immediately to the palace. Something happened. So he goes back. He said, I'll come back later and talk to you all, right? Trijata nurses Sita, right? Sita was in a state of shock. So she then, revives Sita and she pacifies Sita by saying, don't worry, that is just Ravana trying his magic tricks on you. But, from what I hear, Rama and Lakshmana and on the monkey army are still all alive, all are well. The war is going to start because Ravana is not giving in. And then Sita prayed, thank you. Now, this is the power here. I want to talk to you about Maya or illusion. Even when something is realistically present, Maya or illusion has the capacity to influence and cloud our sense of direction so that we go in the path of the Maya or the illusion, thereby circumventing what is actually real practical situation. Right? The power of Maya or illusion over the mind. So how do you solve this? Look what Sita did. She goes back to meditate. Remember, I said to you, CIA leads you somewhere. It's not the Central Intelligence Agency of America, right? CIA is constant and integrated awareness leads you to God. CIA equals God, G-O-D. So Sita meditates and thanks and calls all the divine forces, all the gods, come and help my husband, right? Ravana then says, okay, I want you all to tighten all the security in all the four corners, north, east, south, west, right? Then Angada, of course, goes back and tells Rama, look, that guy is not giving up. In fact, he says, anytime, tell your Rama to come. So Rama has no choice but to declare full-fledged war on Ravana. And of course, he tells Sugriva, he says, right, let's attack. So Rama instructs Nila, Angada, Hanuman, Jambavan to take all the four corners, right? Four gates of Lanka, North Gate, East Gate, South Gate, West Gate. And of course, the Vanaras enter. A monkey army was fantastic. Now, when I say monkey, right, I must tell you that there were at least 14 different varieties of monkeys, my dear brothers and sisters. 14 different types of varieties. Today, how many types of varieties are there? 14 different types of varieties of monkeys were fighting in that war. Big, small, large, tiny, tall, short, minute, all kinds of monkeys. That was the richness of the natural flora and fauna at that time. Even monkeys had 14, 15 different types. Now, this was the first day of war. Rama said, go and attack. So, Nila, Angada, Jambavan, and Hanuman, the four great, the four generals, if you like, all took north, east, south, west. First day of war. Now, using his divine and supernatural powers of Jyotisha and Grahanyana, I'm talking about Valmiki now, Valmiki calculates and states that the war actually lasted for 13 days. Remember when I did Gita, I told you Mahābhārata war lasted for 18 days, hence 18 chapters. This war lasted for 13 days. And he calculated, like I said, using Jyotisha Shastra and Grahanyana. Graha is the planets, right? Planetary movement, planetary. This is how even NASA today calculates distances and all of that, right? Looking at the positioning. So, using Jyotisha Shastra and Grahanyana, sitting where he was, placed as he was, he could see. And he says, the war actually started on this day and ended on this day, ended on a 13th day. It ended on a day called Phalguni Krishna Ammavasya. And Valmiki says it was the 15th of November, 7292 BC, according to later calculations that showed, it was that sort of time, right? Of course, in Valmiki's time, he said, 7,200 odd BC. And later they calculated when science grew a little bit more, and then they used it. So Ravana actually, if you want a date, and Valmiki's were based on Valmiki's calculation, it was 15th of November, 7292 BC. And what did NASA say? The bridge was built about 7,200 years before Christ. Now, how do you reconcile that? Fantastic science. Fantastic science. Valmiki had nothing except Shruti and Smriti, right? And Jnana Drishti. Whereas science has all these, utensils, equipments, resources. Anyway, so that was the first day of war. And on the 13th day, Ravana got killed, right? So thousands were killed on either side, right? Lots of monkeys were killed, and the battlefield was soaked in blood. Lots of Ravana's people were killed. But it looked at, in the first few days, Rama's army was getting the upper hand, right? Then Ravana called his son Indrajit. He said, go. I think it's time you went. So Indrajit was gifted with many astras. One of them was called a Nagapasha Astra. Nagapasha Astra is something that, when you shoot an arrow, that arrow turns to 1,000 snakes, right? Sahasra Naga Pasha Astra, 1,000 snakes, just hits you like that. So powerful, very, very powerful Astra, Nagapasha Astra. He released hundreds of serpents from his arrow, soon hit Rama, Lakshmana. Of course, because of the power, it dazed both Rama and Lakshmana. They both fell to the ground. And of course, the serpents acted as ropes and tied their hand. So looking at this, Rama and Lakshmana are down. Oh my God, all the armies started to panic. All the armies and all the monkeys started to panic, right? Now, Indrajit, of course, looking at that, thought Rama and Lakshmana were dead, right? And he conveys the message to Ravana. Ravana, of course, sends the message to Sita and say, look, we fought and both Rama and Lakshmana are dead. And he says, let's go. Take the Pushpaka Vimana, go to the battlefield and show Sita this, right? But Trijata basically again pacified and consoled Sita by saying, "Don't worry, there is no confirmation of their death. That I think they're just unconscious, but just pray that they will." But as she was saying that, the holy Garuda, which is the Vahana of Lord Vishnu, right? Garuda had come and had landed where Rama and Lakshmana were. And, it bit off all the serpents which was there. Of course, serpents and Garuda. If you see, even I may have mentioned, on the feet of Lord Muruga, where the Mayura, the peacock, is there. At the base of the peacock's feet, the snakes are there. So the snakes have got, this subservience or subordinate attitude towards birds, right? Because the birds prey on them. Of course, here we're talking about the great eagle, the falcon, right? Garuda. So it attacked all the snakes, and then with its wings, it fanned and it, gently massaged with the wings, Rama and Lakshmana, and soon both were revived, right? Garuda stroked their faces and their wounds were healed. And of course, they were, they woke up very fresh. Garuda then flew away. Again, divine help will come, right? So the Vanara army then regained their faith, their strength when they saw Rama and Lakshmana, back into action, right? Then what happened? And they saw the masters, of course, they said, "Oh my God, they're back, drums and bugles and all, filled the air." So they resumed the war the next day with great vigor. And Ravana started to send all his generals and lieutenants because he knew that, this needed a bit more, slightly higher level of intervention. Of course, with Hanuman there, he kills all the agoric Rakshasas, right? He kills Akampana, he kills Dhumraksho, and he kills Prashta. All these are big, huge asuras. One by one, they were killing off. Finally, Ravana had no choice. He himself had to come, right? So he mounted his gigantic chariot with 1,000 bells. Imagine the chariot is so big, right? And Ravana is not a pint-sized man. He was also huge. The chariot had 1,000 bells, on top of it. Imagine an umbrella with the little bells around it, right? So imagine the umbrella, which is, at the top of the chariot, 1,000 bells tolling. And they're not small-sized bells, right? Huge bells. And of course, Ravana sat right there in the middle. And just imagine the magnanimity of the entire scenario there. Huge was the scene, right? Anyway, he comes and then fierce battle ensues. Then Ravana shoots the Brahmastra at Lakshmana, and this made Lakshmana fall unconscious. Hanuman saw this, and Hanuman, with his gadam, hits Ravana's foot, and Ravana falls off the chariot. And as Ravana tries to, compose himself, Hanuman quickly carries away Lakshmana to Rama. And then the sunset. The Yuddha dharma was, they start at sunrise and they end at sunset. They never fight beyond that, or before that, or beyond that. Right? That was called Yuddha dharma. Right? Even in the West, we have a theory called just war theory, whereby the justness or the fairness or the requirement of equitable action was part and parcel of war, or fair action, equity. So Ravana was going back to his camp because sunset. Rama, even though Rama had turned up soon after he used the Brahmastra on Lakshmana, Rama turns up, and Rama saw that Ravana was wounded and the sun was setting. So he told Ravana, "I know still there's a few minutes for the sun to set, but I can see you are also wounded. So go and take rest, heal yourself, and come back tomorrow." Now, for Rama to do that, again, this goes to show his nobility, right? And just because you are in a state of animosity with someone does not mean you cannot exercise some compassion for them, right? So Ravana was devastated, and he was also ashamed that his pride was humbled. Basically, pride goes before a fall. So he said, "Wake up, Kumbhakarna. Well, all this time, three brothers, right? Ravana, Vibhishana had, changed camps. Kumbhakarna was, I told you before, he sleeps for 6 months, right? Wakes up one day and then goes back to sleep. In that one day, he gets up to eat. Right? Anyway, so he's like asleep all the time, So he was woken up from his sleep prematurely. And of course, all the other sons and, nephews and everybody was also called up. And each of them were being wiped out by this Vanara army. So when Kumbhakarna came, and before Kumbhakarna went to Ravana, he had found out what is happening, why was I woken up. So everybody told him this is what happened. Actually, Kumbhakarna, although of tamasic nature, he actually told Ravana, look, you just return Sita and ask Rama's forgiveness. This is not right. Rama gets mad and say, you have a duty to serve your king. Do your duty. Don't teach me dharma. Okay. Either you do it, or you be in breach of your duty as a brother to me, and duty as a general of my army. So Kumbhakarna had no choice. He had no choice but to do what Ravana asked him to do. So Kumbhakarna goes to war. He was just whacking and annihilating the monkey army, right? Everybody got panicked. They said, Rama, you better go. Rama, you better go. Now, Agastya when he was there, he told Rama, Kumbhakarna cannot be defeated except by what we call a systematic injury. So he says, don't use anything else. Use the Pinaka Danush. Pinaka Danush of Shiva. Pinakine. First, you take off his hands. Sever both hands. Then you sever both legs. Then only you go for the head. If you do it in any other way, you will never fall. Right? You will never fall. Kumbhakarna. So Rama remembered this, and of course he takes the Pinakine and he recites the mantra and he says both arms. Arrows goes and severs both arms. Then another arrow is shot, both legs, and then finally the head. And Kumbhakarna falls. Boom. Now Ravana sat dejected when he heard of Kumbhakarna's death. He said, my God, Kumbhakarna, no one can defeat him. So when he was in such a state of dejection, Indrajit again saw. He said, no, I cannot allow my father like that. So he goes, and performs a special yajna to rejuvenate his powers and to increase the intensity of his powers, right? Then, of course, when Kumbhakarna died, his son Kumbha and Nikumba, sons of Kumbhakarna, they said, we will take care of these monkeys. And of course, Hanuman and Jambavan was there. They killed Kumbha and Nikumba, right? Indrajit then came back after his yajna with his power. Again, he started to, create havoc. He had a power to be invisible. So what? Being invisible from the sky, he was shooting. So all the army, the monkey army was being killed, and they don't know where this thing is coming from, right? So Rama said, okay, but I better go and do something. So he called Lakshmana. He says, you cover my back, right? And let me get this guy. Of course, Rama cannot see Indrajit because Indrajit has got this Maya Jala, boon. So from Rama was just trying to see, where the arrows are going to come from. And as he was preparing, Indrajit used his, again, Nagapashastra and shot one arrow towards Rama and Lakshmana. And it hit Lakshmana and Lakshmana fell, right? Lakshmana fell. And obviously sunset. So they retreat, but Lakshmana is unconscious. Vibhishana brings Rishi Sushena. By the way, Vibhishana never participated in the war. He stayed in Rama's camp, right? And he was constantly praying, right? That the right side should win. He didn't pray for Ravana. He didn't pray for Rama. He said, the right side doing the right thing must win. Okay? That is dharma. That is absolute dharma. Anyway, Rishi Susena says, this is a very powerful astra, right? And there's a mantra here that says the person who's hit by this cannot survive the next sunset. So he says, look, there's only about 4 hours before the sun rises. So you better do something. And the Rishi Susena, who's, what do you call, learned in the science of Ayurveda, says there's only one herb that can be used, right? And you all know, I'm coming to the point of the Sanjeevani, right? Only the Sanjeevani can save Lakshmana. And it has to be brought before sunrise. Otherwise, I'm sorry to say, we'll lose Lakshmana. Meanwhile, what Ravana did, he called Surya. He said, you come here, Surya. Of course, Ravana was more powerful than any of this. Remember, his boon said, only excluded man and monkey. Everybody else was circumvented. Comes under his power. He told Surya, I want you to come out 3 hours earlier tomorrow. And Surya said, okay, and went. Now, when Hanuman heard that Surya is planning to rise 3 hours early, because if he rises three hours early, the sunrise is already there, and therefore Lakshmana is killed. If Lakshmana is killed, Rama is weak. If Rama is weak, everybody else is also vulnerable, right? Hanuman flies to Surya and he becomes bigger than Surya. Remember, Surya gave him a boon to say that you can harness my tejas at any will, at the time you will it. At any time you will it, you can harness the tejas. And of course, Brahma said you can become as big as the universe or as small as an atom, right? So Hanuman grew bigger than the sun, right? Took the sun and kept it with him, right? He says, I will let you out at the right time when you should come out at sunrise, right? Of course, Ravana heard, but he couldn't do anything because he couldn't find where. So what happened was, Hanuman came back and asked Sushena Rishi, where can I find this? And of course, Sushena said, this is up on the hills of Himalayas. So go, So Hanuman flies. Jamban says exactly where to go and look for it, right? So Hanuman flies. Meanwhile, Ravana had already instructed. Ravana has got news coming back to him from the battlefield, right? What's happening on the other side. So he actually instructs what do you call, an asura called Kalanemi, who in the guise of a rishi, right? Kalanemi is the son of Maricha. Remember Maricha? So Ravana sends him, says, go and kill. Hanuman is coming. Hanuman is the one who killed your father. Or it was a cause of your father dying. Anyway, so this guy disguises himself as a rishi and he says, he waits. He sees Hanuman. He calls, come land here for a while, go and have a bath, have some food. And then, remember, Hanuman, once he's focused on something, he doesn't waste time, right? But because the rishi telling him, this will give you success in your mission, he said, okay. And when he put his foot on the lake, he saw a crocodile. Right? This crocodile was sent by this Kalanemi Rishi, who is actually son of Maricha. Right? Of course, Hanuman fights with and kills the crocodile. The crocodile had a boon that it had to be killed by someone who's noble and steadfast in their duty, and then it goes back to his Gandharva form. Right? So when Hanuman killed the crocodile, it regained its form and thanked Hanuman for releasing it from its sin and said to Hanuman, this is what is happening. That guy is not a rishi. He is actually son of Maricha, sent by Ravana to kill you. So, of course, Hanuman goes back to the ashrama. He picks this Kalanema Rishi and swings him and throws him with such might that he lands in the court of Ravana. And Ravana actually kills him because he failed in his mission, right? Then he goes to the mountain, remembering where Jambavan told him to go. And he's looking for this. Where can I find it? Where can I find it? He doesn't know there's so many herbs. All look the same. And he's thinking, oh my God, what do I do? So he meditates for a while, It's one spot. I think I mentioned to you, there's one point, where I met someone in Pashupatinath, having come back from Kailash, and he showed a photo, and on that photo, you could see Hanuman meditating. And he said he just saw this rock formation. It was very odd. And he thought, well, this is not usual. So he took the photo, and when it developed, it showed the photo of Hanuman meditating. And Valmiki says Hanuman meditated in the Himalayas. Anyway, so Then he decides, look, I'm still not clear which one to take. So he uproots the entire hill, and carries. This is why you see some pictures of Hanuman. Hanuman's carrying a hill, right? Which is full of herbs. And he flies. And as he's flying from Kailash, he flies over Nandigrama. Nandigrama is where Bharata is, right? Bharata thought, their kingdom is going to be attacked because he is standing guard of Ayodhya, right? So he sees this monkey, huge monkey carrying a mountain coming, and he shoots his arrow and Hanuman falls. But when Hanuman falls, he chants Ram, 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 and then Bharata realizes. And of course, Bharata knows the art of Ayurveda. So he actually administers one of the other herbs to Hanuman. Hanuman regains immediately. And then, of course, Bharata says, look, if you're short for time, I can shoot my arrow that will take you there in a minute. Hanuman says no, because Bharata was skilled in the archery as well. But Hanuman said, no, I don't want you to use such powers. I will fly myself. So, of course, Hanuman continues his journey, flies, just half an hour before sunset. And, of course, Rishi Susena, Vibhishana, Rama, and Hanuman administer the Sanjeevani herb to Lakshmana, and Lakshmana regains consciousness and is able to fight. This is the power of Ayurveda, right? Natural herbs, natural remedy, right? And of course, Hanuman releases just as he kept his word, right? Just as he said he kept his word, he released Surya, and at the right time, Surya rose as he should, right? So feeling rejuvenated, yes, thank again, they prepared for battle again. Again, Indrajit came out. He said, oh, you're still not dead. And Lakshmana used Aindra. Aindra is a special weapon that was given to him, by one of the rishis when they were gifting different weapons. So Lakshmana used Aindra on Indrajit. It's like a lightning, It's also called Vajra in the hands of Indra, Lord Indra. It's called Vajra. In the hands of Lakshmana, it was called Aindra, right? The concept is the same. And it severed the head of Indrajit, this Aindra Astra. And then obviously, I take you back to karma, right? Now the story goes back that Indrajit had once captured Indra and brought him before his father because Indra wasn't prepared to do something that Ravana had asked him to do. So Indrajit went, captured Indra, Lord Indra, brought him back, and Indra said, one day it is my Vajra in another form that will mark your end. And Indrajit just laughed. So you see the karma, right? What was said by Indra actually materialized in the form of Lakshmana using the Vajra Yuddha or Aindra Astra against Indrajit. Karma always works, no exception. So Rama was very happy that, Indrajit, who was the main problem to the Vanaras progressing in the war, that's been solved now. Ravana could not believe that his son Indra, the great Indrajit, right? You see, all the great ones, right? Kumbhakarna, and then Kumbha, Nikumba, then Indrajit, everybody was dying. Ravana was inconsolable, and this grief turned into anger. He next day he was on a man with a mission. Just whacked and killed everybody, right? Caused, innumerable amount of deaths. Lakshmana, Vibhishana, Vibhishana said, keep out of the way. And of course, when Vibhishana had gone to see what was happening, right? When Ravana saw Vibhishana, his fury doubled and he shot a blazing here. Ravana also got many astras, right? So he took the Rudra Dandam. Rudra Dandam is Shiva's staff. Rudra, as you know, and Dandam is a staff, So he used Shiva's staff and hit Lakshmana, right? Lakshmana again fell unconscious. But of course, Hanuman was there with the, all the herbs, right? So he was with the hill of herbs. They managed to bring him back in no time. And of course, all the monkeys that were not killed, who suffered serious injuries, they were all being recovered by these herbs. And then, of course, finally, Rama meets Ravana. Terrible battle ensues between them. They are fighting, days they are fighting. Devas were watching, Gandharvas were watching, all up there watching, and the monkeys were watching from down. Ravana's camp, they were watching, one after the other, astras were going. Ravana was releasing, Rama was releasing, one more potent than the other, and they were fighting. Rama used his bow, his dhanush, everything, and he cut off Ravana's head, one after the other. As soon as he cut off one, another would grow in the same place. As soon as he cut off that, another would grow. So it was unending. And Rama was baffled. He said, what is happening? And Ravana just laughed. Then sunset, they fought till sunset, and then sunset, they both retreated to their camps. Rama was in a total state of confusion because, he had killed a countless number of asuras, countless amount of power, right? And he's thinking, this is the 12th night, the evening of the 12th day of the war. And Rama's thinking, I can't. The worst I can do is, take his head off. If I take his head off, another grows. If I take the head off, I take 13 off, 13 grows, 10 off, 10 grows. So he doesn't, it's not clear what he's meant to do. Then, of course, he goes into meditation. You see, the message here is whenever you are in a problem, or you're facing a problem, or you're at a stage where you can't make your decision, always go within, meditate for a few minutes, and surrender. Remember, I spoke to you about surrender, fear and surrender, right? Faith, fear, and surrender. So Rama went to meditation. At that point, Agastya Maharishi comes. So help will always come at the right time. That is the dharma of help, right? Remember, if you do dharma, dharma will come and help you. Dharmo rakshati rakshitaha. I always say this, right? So Agastya Maharishi comes. This is where he teaches Rama the famous salutation to the sun called Aditya Hridayam. Aditya is the sun, and Hridayam is where you make your, in heart so powerful that it shines with the brilliance of the sun. This mantra he was teaching Rama, and he said, you meditate on Surya, you recite this mantra, then you say this mantra to the arrow, and then you shoot it. Don't just shoot it at his head. First arrow you shoot at his heart, and then immediately follow with the second arrow and shoot his navel. So Rama was thinking, navel, Nabi Stanabara, right? Anyway, Rama says, why not? That's where Ravana's potency of life, immortality is kept in the pot which is placed in his navel. So Agastya teaches him the mantra and says, learn this, recite it tomorrow, shoot the arrow, 2 arrows, one to the heart, one to the navel. Aditya Hridayam is very, very, very famous, right? And it's very, very powerful, right? I've told many people to learn it and recite it. And it's so powerful. It's got 31 stanzas. Each stanza has got 4 lines, right? So, Tato yuddha parishrantam samare chintaya sthitam ravanam chagrado dushtva yuddhaya samupasthitam devadescha samagamya gastum abhyagatoranam uphagamyat bhavitramam agastyo bhagavan rishihi Rama Rama Mahābhāho sunuguhyam sanatanam yena sarvan nareen vatsa vidayesi. This is the first 16 lines. And he's telling Rama that the moment you recite this, nothing can stop you in the way. And so Rama meditates on this mantra until sunrise. And sunrise, he takes bath in the sea. And this is the 13th day of the war. Remember, the final day of the war, right? Now, Indra, remember he said to Rama when he met him, he sends his chariot with the charioteer Matali. He says, go. Today is the day. It's important. So, because Ravana is coming in a chariot, Rama doesn't have a chariot. So Indra says, okay, you also fight him with a chariot. So, you have what we call Yuddha Samadharma. So you're both facing at the same level. So Rama and Ravana were both wounded as a result of fighting with each other. Rama wounded every limb of Ravana, but he still fought bravely. Similarly, Ravana also tired Rama, and of course, he still looked as majestic as ever. Ravana I'm talking about, right? Then Matali says, now, you've forgotten what Agastya Maharishi told you. Use the mantra now. So Rama suddenly remembered he had forgotten in fighting with Ravana, had forgotten about the Aditya mantra. So he takes out the arrow and he says, Tato Yuddha Parishrantam Samarechantaya Ravanam Chagado Dustva Yuddhaya Samavastitam Devade. He recites the mantra, the entire mantra, right? And then he releases it to the heart. Hridayam, Aditya Hridayam. Can you imagine the fire that the sun is when it's shot into someone's heart? So that arrow completely blinds Ravana. And as he's trying to regain composure, in the next instant, Rama says again the mantra and shoots at the navel. Hits. Now, Rama was at that time very fierce. Remember, I said to you, one of the 16 names of Rama was, Jata Roshasya Samuga Devascha Vidyati. Even the gods become fearful when Rama is provoked to war. So he became that, Become that, then you can perform as that. So he released it, and that's it. Ravana fell thunderously. Can you imagine a crash that shook the three worlds? Bhuloka, Bhuvaloka, Suvaloka, all were shook. But even lying there on the face of death, his face only glowed with the amount of knowledge that he has in me. Of course, everybody was shouting. The Vanara shouted with joy, dancing away. Remaining Rakshasas were frightened and they scattered like scared mice. The Devas were showering flowers from above, and Surya Bhagavan smiled, giving his warm blessings. Right? A head count was taken by Sugriva. I said, okay, right, let's recollect, recoup, find out how many casualties. So they saw all the casualties and they said, 1,000 monkeys are missing. They're not dead because their bodies are not here. But from the head count, 1,000 monkeys are missing. And, when Rama heard, Rama told Hanuman, go and look for them. Right? Now, you remember I told you, Ravana came in his huge chariot with 1,000 bells. And the bells were huge in size, right? So Hanuman went looking. Then he saw bells lying all over. From one bell, huge bell, right? He could hear the sound of scratching. So he goes near and he could hear that the sound is coming from inside. And these were monkeys trying to get out. Now remember I told you there are 14 varieties of monkeys, right? These monkeys were called Singlika monkeys who were trapped under the bell, right? And because they are small in size, 1,000 of them were trapped. The bell could not be moved. That was the gregarity of the bell, so huge it was. And Hanuman just picks the bell up with his tail and lifts it and frees the 1,000 Singlika monkeys. And of course, they were so joyful and they all went to Sugriva and Rama. Rama saw this and he said, only you can do this feat, Hanuman. And because you carried the bell with your tail, you will always be remembered with a bell tied to your tail. And anyone who worships you in this form, you will save them just like you saved the Singlika monkeys, the bell. So the bell is the trouble being lifted by just worshipping Hanuman. Right? So can you imagine if one bell was that size? Chariot had, more than 54 bells of that size. Can you imagine the chariot size then? Can you imagine if that's a chariot size, the size of Ravana? So such was the grandeur of this man. So anyway, that's the story of the bell. I did tell you that I'll tell you the story of the bell, right? The bell in Hanuman's tail. This is why, and Valmiki mentions it. The other thing is why I also said to you, I'll tell you why Hanuman is always painted in orange or in red, right? Sindoor. So once, this is going back after the war, right? But because I'm talking about Hanuman, I'm fast forwarding to that point so as to make it contextual. Hanuman saw Sita praying, right? And he watched her pray because there's a picture of Rama there, right? Of course, wherever he sees Rama, he goes into meditation, right? He sees, and then she takes the sindoor from the altar and she puts it on her head. So Hanuman, the Vanara, was a bit confused. He said, what is Mataji doing? So he goes and says, Mataji, what are you doing? Then she explains the concept of sindoor. And this is one more reason why, the Hindu women put sindoor on your forehead. One is to show that they are married, so that other men, when they look at them, they know these are married women, so we shouldn't look at them with any other thing. Remember what Rama said? Janani janma bhumischa swarghadapi gariyasi. Except for your wife, all are mothers and sisters. So this is one reason. Now, of course, and he said, okay, what happens when you put the Hanuman asked Sita, and Sita says, well, because I'm married, when I put this, I have asked all the forces in the world to protect my husband Rama, who has actually given me this gift of sindoor. At that moment, you know what Hanuman did? He take the entire container of sindoor and pours it over him. Sita asked, what have you done? Mataji, I don't want to put just one. I want to put it all over my body so Ram Bhagavan is safe, always kept safely. So that is the concept of the worship of Hanuman, or why he's always put in orange or in red, because that is what he did when he found out that the sindoor is actually to keep or sustain the life of the husband, of course, for Sita husband, and of course for Hanuman. He's Ramadasa, Ramatuda, Ramaseva, Rama Bhakta. He did that. So that is why the bell is there for Hanuman. And of course, the the sindoor. So now you know, right? Of course, the news of Ravana's death affected everybody, right? Mainly it affected Mandodari, but it also affected Vibhishana, because end of the day, you know what they say, blood is thicker than water. So Vibhishana was sad that, Ravana could have avoided all that, but his ego and arrogance got in the way of right action. So everybody was dancing, the Vanara shouted, they were dancing with joy, remaining Rakshasas were frightened and they ran. Vibhishana was moved to tears. Then Rama saw him and says, a hero who dies in the battlefield should not be mourned. Ravana was a great man. He died a brave death. Now look how the sun is shining the light on him, and his place is in heaven. And then Rama says, it is only right that you perform the final rites for Ravana. Right? Because Ravana did the final rites for Kumbhakarna when he died. Anyway, so Vibhishana at first refuses, and then Rama says, no, all enmity must end with death. All enmity must end with death. I have met some people who say, even though you die, I will still hate you. I will never, That's all. This is all lessons for us. All enmity dies with death. Should die with death. So Rama convinces Vibhishana that it is only dharma. It is only dharmic that he performs the last rites. And then, of course, after that, a few days later, Rama does the Raja Abhisheka for Vibhishana and appoints Vibhishana as the new king of Sri Lanka. Lanka, the title Sri. Mandodari, mother of Indrajit, right? Remember Indrajit's mother, because Indrajit was Ravana's son, right? She comes and she tells Rama, you cannot be an ordinary man. You have to be Lord Narayana, because no one could have easily killed my husband. He was invincible. Now, Ravana was an ardent Shiva Bhakta, right? And of course, Mandodari was an ardent Narayana devotee. That is why Rama was an avatar of Narayana and Hanuman was an avatar of Lord Shiva. And together they had come to put an end to this. And of course, no one, the Shiva Tandava Stotram. Shiva Tandava Stotram was created and written for Lord Shiva by Ravana. And no one was a more skilled player of Veena than Ravana himself. That's why the best and the most exquisite of Veenas is called Ravana Veena, named after Ravana. And of course, because of ego, once he called Agastya. Agastya, of course, is also skilled, right, in many things. He called him for a duel. He said, if you can beat me in Veena, then I shall say you are great. And because of arrogance, one of Ravana's string broke. Because Agastya could only play very well, right? But he was no match. But he played with full surrender to Vani, Devi Saraswati. Whereas Ravana was saying, you can't beat me, man, because I am superior. I am far more superior than that. Arrogance actually made one string go bust and then boom, he lost, right? So Ravanavina, Ravaneswaran, such a great person, but because of the ego, the arrogance, the visuals, the sattvic visuals were blinded. Rajasic took over, and the adharmic actions pursued, and that's the end result of him. So actually, Ravana was not defeated by Rama. I said this before and I'm saying it again. Ravana was not defeated by Rama in war, but Ravana was defeated by his own ego and the karmic consequences of all the sins that he committed. So Rama then sends Hanuman, say, go and bring Sita. Sita, of course, is so happy. And Ravana, when Hanuman went there, he wanted to kill all those ladies, all the lady asuras who were looking after Sita. And Sita said, no, they are not to blame. They are only doing what Ravana asked them to do. Don't hurt them, just leave them be, right? See, look at Sita's mercy. Mercy and compassion should be available at all times throughout, not just for certain occasions, right? This is the mark of a noble soul. So Sita is given, a royal bath, and then, she appears all dressed before Rama. And as Rama, of course, Rama knows Sita. He had no doubt about her purity, right? Which man will tell his wife that he doubts her purity? You tell me. Every man will know. Not my wife is what the answer will be. Not my wife, not my wife. My wife is pure. My wife is dharma patini, right? Like that, Rama also knew Sita is untouchable. She is like fire. Why she is like fire? Because her kavacha is fire. Who is fire? Agni Deva, right? When they were sent from Ayodhya, right? Vashishta and Vishwamitra said, we are sending Agni with you, Sita. Agni will always be with you and he will protect you. So I told you, these rishis can see far ahead, right? They had already sent, and Rama knew. So when Rama opened his arms to embrace Sita, now listen to me, this is a very important point, right? And people need to be very clear about this and stop reading all the, literary nonsense that's been written by people, who actually have not done sufficient research into this. Those days, words were unnecessary because the power of the communication of the eyes were far superior. So Rama looked at Lakshmana and looked at Sita, and three of them, right? More than that, Rama and Sita's eyes met. Now, Sita knew what Rama's thoughts were. This is the power of that communication, this ESP, extrasensory perception. Right? We've lost it in the modern world, but it used to exist, where love was pure and unadulterated. You can just look at each other and you can see. The famous Tamil saying, kannum kannum nokkina, so you can actually communicate through the eyes. Anyway, so Sita then tells Lakshmana, Rama already knows that his wife is pure. So he did not ask for an Agni Pariksha at this stage. Right? Remember, this is happening in Sri Lanka after the war, after Vibhishana is made king. Right? Sita is brought. Sita sees Rama, and Sita wants to make a point. Right? And she prays to Agni. Tells Lakshmana to set up the pyre, with the rock, with the wood. And she steps in. Of course, the fire is a protector. And of course, it is exactly doing what it's meant to do, protecting Sita, who is pure and untouched by anyone else except Rama. Rama knew that. But he didn't stop Sita, right? He did not stop Sita. Sita walked, and of course, Rama also knew Agni, as the protector, will not harm Sita, right? And perhaps that may be the reason why Rama allowed it. Now, Rama did not request Sita to do it verbally, right? Just communication through the eyes. Anyway, at this point, right, Sita is the one who wanted to do this, no direct request from Rama, right? She jumps into the fire, and Agni Deva carries her out, totally untouched and unscathed by the glorious burning fire. I take you back to Mahābhārata, what happened to Draupadi, Draupadi was born of the fire, remember? her father did the yajna to beget a son to kill Dronacharya. Of course, the son came and immediately followed by Draupadi. Right? So she is purity in one sense. So one of the reasons why she has a bath every year at the end, 5 brothers, so she spends 1 year with each brother. At the end of that 1 year, she has a fire bath. So she walks into the fire and comes out pure. And 1 year goes into the fire, comes up pure. This is Agni Pariksha. But Agni Pariksha for them, for us is Agni Pariksha, right? You light a stick, you put your finger, you'll get burnt. Those days they walked in because they know they were pure, right? So the aim is to, they know that they were pure, so they know it won't harm us or affect us, right? And totally unscathed. So of course Sita had proved that she was beyond any doubt purer than purity itself, right? But some authors think that Sita may have acted a bit hastily or rather too soon, because that is not the place where she had to prove it, because everybody knew Ravana kept her. Ravana never touched her because Ravana was under a vow that he could not have any woman who does not give consent freely. That's another curse that given to him by, in one of his many sins, right? So that's why he was giving Sita time, say consent, but of course he died before that. So everybody in Lanka actually knew that Sita was pure. She was not touched by Ravana, right? Including Mandodari, who was Ravana's wife. So there was no reason for her to do Agni Pariksha there. But she did, right? Remember, they are just human beings, right? Sita is not Mahalakshmi, so she doesn't know anything, right? But because of the extent and depth of purity she wanted to prove, and she proved it. And Rama, of course, is another man. I told you he has got many roles to play. So as the husband, he knew what his wife was. As the brother, he knew what his brothers were. As a king, he knew what his subjects were. And he had to behave dharmically in each role that he portrayed. So, little did they realize that there's another problem that's going to come when they go back to Ayodhya. But I'll come back to that later, right? So because Agni allowed Sita to walk into her, right? The Panchabhutas actually said, Agni, how could you do this? Agni said, I was asked to do this by her. This is not my choice. I didn't burn her, right? I burnt as I would normally, naturally. And I knew she was, pure. So what fear? But Agni was still cursed. And he prayed to Brahma to relieve himself of this curse. And Brahma told him to go and meditate in a place in Rameshwaram. This place is now called Agni Tirtham in Rameshwaram, right? If you go to Rameshwaram, there are about 21 wells there, all within the temple grounds, right? 21 wells. And some of you may have been there. I've been there many times, right? Normally this time, I'm usually there already on my journey towards Sabarimala. So we go to all these temples. So one part is Agni Tirtham, where you actually bathe. So any doshas related to Agni or fire, that can be, dealt with there. Then you got Rama Tirtham, Lakshmana Tirtham, Sugriva Tirtham. You got all types of the 21 wells is 21 Tirthams. So they're very happy. Rama tells Hanuman, fly and tell Bharata that we are all coming back, and ask him to do the necessary preparations. I'm very happy. And Vibhishana gives Rama a gift of the Pushpaka Vimana. Pushpaka Vimana means like what we call, the aeroplane, Air Force One, if you like, right? In those days. And Rama, Lakshmana, Sita, Sugriva, and Vibhishana all fly back to Ayodhya in that Pushpaka Vimana. And Rama takes the same route that he took to get to Sri Lanka, so that he can explain to Sita everything that happened from the time she was kidnapped by Ravana. And, of course, he tells her everything that happened, how the bridge was built, how he met Hanuman, how he met all the other rishis on the way to Kishkinda, Agastya, Maharishi, Aitri, Chitrakuta, all this. And of course, Hanuman flies in advance and informs Bharata. Everybody is waiting. Vashishta has come, Vishwamitra has come, everybody waits for Rama. When they all land, first thing Bharata brings the sandal and says, brother, there you are. I have looked after this with my life and protected your crown, your kingdom, your people, your throne. I have faithfully served the sandals for 14 years. Now relieve me of my responsibility. That is why Paduka Puja is a big thing, because Rama gave it that. He said, because Bharata, anyone who worships Padukas will be blessed beyond their wildest dreams. Then, of course, Vishwamitra and Vashishta, the Kulaguru Vashishta, they performed the Ramarajya Pattabhishekam. And of course, Rama was crowned as king, Sita was queen, and they were, very, very happy. All the guests were invited, all the rishis, all the people who they had met during their Vanavasa would help them. Remember King Guha, who helped them cross the river? Everybody had come. And then, of course, when Rama, Sita, Lakshmana was standing there after the royal wedding, Hanuman goes and prostrates. That's why sometimes you see the three of them there and Hanuman prostrating. And Hanuman says, I will always be in your service, O great Rama. Rama smiles at Hanuman and blesses him, So Ramarajya, Rama lived apparently 10,000 years after that he ruled, according to Valmiki. Ramarajya was a fantastic time. Everybody was, Satyam, Jnanam, Anantam, and Brahma. All four were present during the Ramarajya. So once in the court, Sita recounted of the time when Hanuman actually had come, and, so she said to Rama, can I gift Hanuman something? Rama says, okay, it's up to you. Give him what you want to give him, right? So Sita takes off a very, very expensive and exquisite pearl necklace and calls Hanuman and gives it to him and says, here, this is for you as my humble gift, thanking you for all your great service that you've done. So Hanuman takes the necklace and shakes it in front of his ears, looks at it and shakes it again, and then he bites one, opens it up, looks at it, and then throws it, and then bites another one. You know what monkeys will do, right? When you give them something, right? Everybody was surprised. Everybody is looking at Hanuman. Finally Sugriva says, Hanuman, what are you doing? This is a very expensive gift given by Mother Sita. What are you doing? You are humiliating them. Then Hanuman looks at everybody and says, this does not vibrate to Ram. I can't hear anything. It's useless to me, right? Vibrate to Ram. What do you mean? Hanuman says, yes, even every single hair on my body vibrates to the vibration of Ram. So Sugriva says, what do you mean? Yeah, Rama lives inside of me. Mother Sita lives inside. So Sugriva says, don't be silly. That's the time. Hanuman, you see the picture of Hanuman opening his heart? This is called Hanuman Hridaya Pradishthabanaha. Hanuman Hridaya Pradishthabanaha. That means Hanuman opens his heart and he says, you think I'm joking? See, who is in my heart? There I see Rama and Sita. Right? Complete silence. Hear what comes off my hair. The hair is vibrating to Ram, Ram, Ram. I mean, Hanuman from head to toe was vibrating with Ram all the time. That's why when you say Sri Ramajayam, boom. And I told you last week, you don't pray to Hanuman by singing praises to Hanuman. You pray to Hanuman and make Hanuman your slave by praying to Ram. If you've been doing it the wrong way around, change it. Right? Now, at this point, I must tell you who is Ravana actually in real life, and his brothers Kumbhakarna, but I'm just going to focus on Ravana. So I'm going back to, before Satya Yuga, right? At Vaikunta. Before the Sanctum Sanctorium, I told you there are two guards waiting at the entrance of the gate. They are called Jaya and Vijaya, right? Dikpalakas, they are called. Dikpalakas. Now, according to the Srimad Bhagavata Purana, right, the four Kumaras, right, the four Kumaras, Sanaka, Sanandana, Sanantana, and Sanat Kumara. Four Kumaras were the Manasa Putras of Brahma. Manasa Putras means they were born of Chitta Suddhi, they were born of thoughts, mind or thought power of Brahma, and these four sons were created, and they were great tapasis, So they, after years and years of tapasya, they were still very young because that was the power of the tapasya. Even 1,000 years of, tapasya, they were so powerful. and yet they had not aged one day. So they went to visit Narayana. They went to Vaikunta, the abode of Vishnu. Just remember, I'm saying before Satya Yuga, right? And Satya Yuga, then Treta Yuga, then Dwapara Yuga, and Kali Yuga now. So when they went, these two guards, looking at the children, 4 children coming, says, "Oh, I can't let you enter and go and see Mahavishnu." Right? See, Jaya and Vijaya, the gatekeepers, could not see that these were actually Sanat Kumaras, the 4 Manasa Putras of Brahma. So they were not allowed. Because they were not allowed, the 4 Kumaras were very angry, and they cursed this Jaya and Vijaya and said, "You have been given a job to do here, and you have not let us in because you have not inquired sufficiently well. Therefore, you have behaved adharmically. You will give up this divine job, and you will be born as mere mortals on Bhuloka, and you will live normal human beings." At that point, they realized these are Sanat Kumaras. Oh my God, Then Vishnu turns up, and Jaya and Vijaya, the gatekeepers, beg Vishnu to reverse the curse. Vishnu says, "Karma must be served. I cannot do anything with the curse. However, I'll give you 2 options. The first option is you will be great, great devotees of Mahavishnu, but you will be born for 7 births. Each birth you may live for hundreds of years. Like that, you have to finish 7 births as great devotees of mine. Or the second option is you get 3 births, but you're born as my enemies." Now, Jaya and Vijaya only used to serving Vishnu. So they chose the second option. They said 3 births, born as his enemies. He will kill us. The quicker we can come back to our main job. So they chose the second option. Of course, once they chose the option, there's no going back on it. And of course, they can't remember, right? Because you're born not with the memory. You're born as a fresh birth. So Jaya and Vijaya could not think about staying away from the Lord Vishnu for 7 births or 7 lives. So they chose to be born as his enemies for 3 births, incarnated on earth. So in Satya Yuga, Ravana was actually Hiranyakashipu. Remember Hiranyakashipu? Vishnu had to become Narasimha to kill him, right? Then, of course, in Treta Yuga, he was born as Ravana, the great Asura, and Rama had to take birth and kill him. And of course, in Dwapara Yuga, he was born as Dantavakra, and Kumbhakarna was Shishupala. Both were killed by Krishna. And Krishna, all these were avatars of Lord Vishnu, isn't it? So 3 births. So when Ravana died, and then the 3rd birth he took as Dantavakra, when Krishna killed him, again he went back to Jaya and Vijaya. But the power, what I want you to see here is in their first birth, they were both born as Asuras. Hiranyakashipu was a great Asura. In their second birth, they were born as Rakshasas, a lower level, but the Rakshasa Ravana had begotten such great powers because of his tapasya. So what I'm saying is, doesn't matter what you are, what you can become is verily in your hands, right? Hiranyakashipu became so powerful because of the tapasya he did. Brahma rewarded him, but of course he wanted the wrong thing, hence destruction. Ravana also was born as a Rakshasa, but because of his tapasya, Brahma gifted him with everything. And of course he didn't use that. Remember I said 10 heads, 4 Vedas, 6 Shastras. Still didn't behave dharmically. And of course the 3rd one was Dantavakra and Shipala. So when he died in Dwapara Yuga and Krishna killed Dantavakra, they both rose up, and Shishupala both rose up and became Jaya and Vijaya again in the doors of Vaikunta, right? So I hope I have put things in perspective, right? Because nothing happens in vain, right? See, because Ravana had a history, had to go through the karma. Even Kumbhakarna had the history, he was Jaya, Ravana was Vijaya, so had to go through that. So I hope I've put things into perspective. Next week, I'm going to be talking about the Yuddha Kanda. Now there is some confusion here, right? Because Valmiki actually ends his writing at this stage by saying, Rama, Rajya ruled Ayodhya for 10,000 years and everybody lived happily until Rama left. That was the end. But then, subsequent writings, particularly, with Tulsidas and the Ramayana and all of this, there was later additions added. So next week I'll be talking to you about this, and obviously the different theories behind Uttara Kanda. Uttara means and, Kanda means, of course, as you know, chapter or book. So, Harihi Om Manyada Sharanam Nasti Tumeva Sharanam Mamaha Tasmat Karunya Bhavena Raksha Raksha Rameshwara Harihi Om.